The Greeks never formed a clearly defined and homogeneous group. Authors like Herodotus and Homer idealized the narratives of Greeks and barbarians. After the legendary King Minos, the Bronze Age culture in Crete is known as Minoan, while the contemporaneous culture in mainland Greece is known as Helladic. The Minoan culture is considered the earliest civilization in Europe, with its earliest phase, the early Minoan, parallel to the 1st to 4th dynasties of Egypt. The late Helladic, also known as the Mycenaean culture, refers to the late Bronze Age. The Mycenaean aristocracy was of a martial nature, as evidenced by the magnificent weapons with war and hunting scenes. It is believed that the Mycenaean warriors arrived around 1450 BC, destroyed the Minoan palaces on Crete and took power. Shortly after 1200 BC, the First Dark Age, many settlements, including the Mycenaean palace centers, were destroyed. Social structures collapsed as the entire economy was centrally coordinated and controlled by the Mycenaean palaces. The Mycenaean palace culture collapsed shortly after 1200 BC. The palaces were destroyed and not rebuilt, although it remains unclear whether external or internal unrest caused the destruction. One possibility is that excessive warfare in Mesopotamia or the Trojan War brought about the end of important trade relationships and Greek raids. Another possibility is that the Sea Peoples first invaded Greece and destroyed the Mycenaean centers before causing the collapse of the Hittite Empire. It is also conceivable that the destruction of the trading centers on the Levant, the Egyptian-Israeli coast, by the Sea Peoples meant that metals were no longer exported to the Aegean, and the lack of bronze resulted in the loss of power of the Mycenaean nobility. Around 1200 BC, the Doric migration began in spurts. In the 8th century BC, large parts of the Peloponnese, northwestern Greece, Crete, Rhodes, southwestern Asia Minor, as well as southern Italy and Sicily, were settled by Dorians. A historically important Doric foundation is Sparta. The economic hardship of small farmers and the competitive mentality of the elites led to sometimes violent conflicts. The First Messenian War, which lasted from 735 to 715 BC, began with Sparta's conquest of the Peloponnese, particularly fertile Messenia in the southwest, which was placed under tributary rule. The Second Messenian War began in 669 BC and ended with the suppression of the revolt of the oppressed Messenian population. Likewise, the Third Messenian War was defeated by the Spartans in 464 BC. There were also other military conflicts, such as the Lelantian War and the war between the Chalcidians and Eretrians from 710 to 650 BC. After these protracted wars, Euboea, once a leading region of Greece, had become a backward area. Both Eretria and the victor of the conflict, Chalcis, had lost their former economic and political importance. Instead of Euboean ceramics, Corinthian vase painting now dominated the Mediterranean ceramics market. Another war at this time was the First Holy War, which took place from 595 to 585 BC. It revolved around the city of Delphi, where there was probably a sanctuary for Zeus or Apollo. The Amphictyony was a loose association of cities in ancient Greece, Asia Minor, and Etruria, which was based on a religious and cultural basis. These city alliances initially formed around a sanctuary and were led by a large part of the Amphictyonic states against groups that had violated the interests of the state or the sanctuary of Delphi. The war was waged by the Amphictyony, Athens, and Sicyon against the Phocian city of Crisa and ended around 590 BC. After its conquest, Crisa was destroyed, its inhabitants destroyed as violators of the Delphic temple, its territory declared the sacred land of Apollo, and its future agricultural use forever forbidden by curses. The form of government at that time is referred to as tyranny or archaic, with force-based autocracy spreading in many areas of the Greek settlement area. In the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, tyranny was gradually replaced by a new form of government, democracy, almost everywhere it still existed. Greek mythology is divided into two main areas that are often intertwined. One of them is about the gods and their deeds, while the other is about the adventures of the heroes. Prometheus, the son of the Titan Iapetus, formed humans from clay. Various authors, including Herodotus, mention 5 different ages. The Golden Age, under the reign of Kronos, people lived in a permanent spring without pain, sorrow, or arduous work for many centuries. The Silver Age, after the fall of Kronos, the Silver Race existed and also lived long, but faced hardships such as the changing seasons and were ultimately destroyed due to their lack of respect for the gods. The Bronze Age, the people of this era were extremely violent and lived in a world where both houses and weapons were made of bronze. The Heroic Age, the people of this time were characterized by their bravery and heroism. The great cycles of legends about Thebes, Troy, and other events took place in this era. The Iron Age, in this last era, described by all sources as degenerate and suffering, lived the poets who told the great epics. The gods still existed, but had withdrawn and hardly intervened in people's daily lives. One of the most famous heroes of the Heroic Age is Heracles, son of Zeus. Heracles was taught the arts of charioteering, archery, fencing, fist-fighting, and wrestling. He was also taught to sing and play the lyre. Although he was very docile, he was always hot-tempered to the point of madness. So he killed his music teacher Linos with the lyre when he wrongly reprimanded him. His foster father King Amphitryon then sent him to Kithaeron to his herds of cattle, probably out of fear of his unbridled strength. Here he grew into a youth among the shepherds. On the Kithaeron, where the herds of Amphitryon and those of Thespius grazed, a lion coughed, which Heracles undertook to fight. Meanwhile, Thespius gave the young hero one of his 50 daughters every night for 50 days, of which 50 sons were born. After a long struggle, Heracles killed the lion and since then wore its skin instead of his usual robe and its head as a helmet. A club made from an olive tree near Nemea was added later. In his anger he killed his wives and children. Heracles did penance and as the oracle of Delphi had called him. Armed with a club that he had carved himself, a sword given to him by Hermes, and a bow and arrow that he had received from Apollo, he went to Argos to King Eurystheus. This gave him a total of 12 mythical tasks. He suffocated the lion by constricting its throat. From then on he wore the lion's skin, which made him almost invulnerable. He burned out each of the Hydra's decapitated necks so that no new heads could grow back. He split the Hydra's body in two and dipped his arrows in its poisonous blood or bile, causing incurable, fatal wounds ever since. He hunted the deer for a whole year until he finally either caught her with a net over the sleeping hind or shot her with an arrow through her 2 front legs and tied her up. He drove the boar out of the forest into a snowfield, where it quickly got tired. To clean Gerion's cattle, Heracles channeled the nearby rivers Alpheos and Peneos through the stable. Athena gave him 2 large metal rattles with which he scared the birds and killed them one by one with poisoned arrows. He tamed the bull and led it to Eurystheus, showed it to him and then released the bull. Heracles accused Diomedes himself of being horse-eaters. After they had devoured their master, Heracles was able to tame them and lead them towards the sea. Although Hippolyte gave him the belt voluntarily, Hera's intrigue led to a fight, which Heracles won by killing Hippolyte and returning to Greece with the belt. Gerion challenged Heracles to a fight, which Heracles won with a poison arrow. Hera, who supported Gerion, was also wounded by Heracles and forced to flee. In order to obtain the apples of the Hesperides, Heracles tricked Atlas, the father of the Hesperides, into picking the apples for him. Hades allowed Heracles to temporarily remove the Hellhound from the underworld. Heracles defeated the dog without weapons and brought him to Eurystheus. That's what the ancient Greek world was like back then, and everyone took Heracles as an example. The first Olympic Games took place in 776 BC. During this time, individual great heroes went out into the world to perform heroic deeds, such as killing a wild boar with a club. These stories were the stuff from which heroes were made. When the Persian Wars broke out in 500 BC, the aim was to unite these individual heroes into a powerful army. The creator god Ahura Mazda chose Darius as king, and he declared himself in an inscription as King of Kings, ruler of the lands and tribes, ruler of this vast earth. In a picturesque relief image, the king appears on a pedestal supported by subject peoples while greeting a winged figure. After a period of short and mild rule of the Greek colonies in Asia Minor, under the Lydian king Croesus around 550 BC, integration into the Persian multi-ethnic empire came as early as 546 BC. Although tributary, the Persian tyranny manifested itself as a personal feudal system in all 20 satrapies, with the satrap, as representative of Persia, appointing local nobles as trustees to exercise power and demand tribute. This was reluctantly accepted until the Ionian revolt. The conquest of Thrace, Macedonia, and the Bosphorus and Hellespont Straits from 516 BC by the Persian king Darius separated the Greek cities around the Black Sea from the rest of Greece on the coast of Asia Minor. Trade relations in particular, especially grain deliveries, were now under Persian control. These and other measures by the great king led to the Ionian revolt along the coast of Asia Minor. Since the rebellions began under Aristagoras of Miletus, the Persians launched an offensive against the city. The Ionians' rebellion was the result of a failed campaign and political intrigue. After the founding of the Persian Empire, the Persian king Cyrus led a campaign to the north against the Scythians in order to expand his empire. During the first Scythian campaign, the Persian king Cyrus lost his head. Darius launched the second Scythian campaign to avenge Cyrus. But that too failed. After the failure of the Scythian campaign, the Persian army returned to their ship bridge over the Bosphorus, with the Scythians breathing down their necks. The Ionians wanted to tear down the bridge on the Bosporus and leave the Persian rule to the Scythians. But the tyrant of Miletus, Histiaeus, was able to stop his followers. In gratitude, he received the city of Myrkinos in Thrace from Darius. However, the general Megabazos distrusted Histiaeus' loyalty and convinced the great king to bring him to Susa as an advisor. Darius then installed Histiaeus' son-in-law as the new tyrant. The newly installed tyrant of Miletus, Aristagoras, had persuaded Artaphernes, the satrap of Sardis, to undertake a campaign against Naxos at the instigation of Naxian refugees. Naxos is a Greek island in the Aegean Sea. Whereupon the Greek colonies in Asia Minor rebelled and the Athenians and Eritrea sent support. The fleets met directly off the coast of Miletus, near the now silted island of Lade. The sea battle began successfully with the Greek squadron from Chios. However, the contingents from Samos and Lesbos suddenly broke off the fight and sailed away, whereupon the remaining fleet was destroyed by the Persians despite fierce resistance. In 494 BC, Miletus was captured and burned after the Battle of Lade. The Ionians submitted to the Persian king Darius, who never forgot Athens' role in this conflict and soon afterwards planned a punitive expedition against the rebel supporters, Athens and Eritrea. In the spring of 493 BC, the Persian general Mardonios, a son-in-law of Darius, set out from Cappadocia and Cilicia with a mixed army of land and sea forces in order to restore Persian rule in Thrace and Macedonia after the Ionian revolt. After this operation, which also included the conquest of Thassos, the Persian fleet was destroyed by a storm near Mount Athos. In the spring of 490 BC, The punitive military expedition, which was specifically directed against Eretria and Athens, began from the assembly point of the army and fleet at Tarsus. Darius appointed his nephew Artaphernes and Datis as generals for this company. The Persian fleet sailed north along the coast of Asia Minor and then turned west of Samos to subjugate Naxos. In the run-up to the campaign of 490 BC, Darius may have demanded the subjugation of various Greek polis on the mainland through symbolic acts of handing over earth and water to his envoys in order to isolate Eretria and Athens. Although this demand was accepted in many cities, Athens and Sparta did not provide assistance. The Persian army marched towards Eretria, while Athens did not provide the requested assistance. After a week of resistance, the city fell, was plundered, and the inhabitants were enslaved to Persia, as Darius is said to have ordered the Athenians to do. The arrival of the Persian fleet in Attica should not have come as a surprise to the Athenians after the extensive subjugation tour in their area of the island, so they reacted immediately. The Persians chose to land on the plain of Marathon, as suggested by Hippias, once ruler of Athens who had been expelled 20 years earlier. The location seemed favorable since it was about 25 miles from Athens and the Athenians could only arrive after the Persians had already fully landed. After a few days of waiting, the Athenians formed up for battle. In particular, the right wing under the command of the Polemarch and the left wing, on which the Plataeans stood, were heavily occupied. In contrast, the hoplite contingent was unusually flat in the middle and could hardly withstand the Persian arrow archers as they charged forward at a run. During the long battle, the Persians finally broke through the center and pursued the retreating Athenians. At the same time, the Greeks retained the upper hand on both wings and then defeated the initially successful Persians in the middle. The fighting on the way to the Persian ships on which the surviving Persians took refuge was particularly costly, meaning they were only able to save 7 ships. The number of casualties on the Persian side is estimated at 6,000 men, while on the Athenian side it was 192. In response to the news of the Persian defeat at Marathon, Darius began a full-scale mobilization against Greece. He sent messengers to gather an army and asked all provinces and cities to provide far more troops than before. In addition, warships, horses, grain, and cargo ships were required. An intensive rearmament and mobilization had now been going on across Asia for 3 years as all the brave prepared for the fight against Hellas. An uprising in Egypt distracted from these preparations as suppressing the uprising became a priority. When Darius died in 486 BC, his son Xerxes succeeded him on the throne. He first crushed the rebellion in Egypt before resuming military plans against Greece and spending another 4 years mobilizing his forces. At the beginning of the Persian Wars in 490 BC. After the defeat of the Ionian resistance, when several Greek cities on the coast of Asia Minor rebelled and Athens and Eretria sent soldiers to support them. In retaliation, the Persian king, Darius I, sent a punitive expedition of 25,000 Persian spearmen to Athens and Eretria, to central Greece. On its way to Greece, the Persian fleet conquered numerous Greek islands such as Naxos. The ships then went ashore near Eretria, but Athens and Sparta refused the call. After the conquest of Eretria, the Persian expedition fleet landed 25 kilometers from Athens.
the boats! All men ashore! Off the boats!
The Persian force was led by General Datis and his immortals, armed with a bow and arrow and a long lance. At this time, a deadly combination of close and ranged combat. The immortals trained on hot coals to perfect their archery skills. These soldiers were in command of the Persian ships and acted as overseers of the prisoners under arms. The rest of the Persian army consisted of forced spearmen, thieves, murderers, and rapists, who were promised freedom.
Check again!
After 3 days and a short hesitation, the Athenians faced the land battle at Marathon, 490 BC. 10,000 hoplites under General Miltiades faced the 20,000-strong Persian army. In contrast to the Spartan hoplites, who were known for their wrestling skills at the Olympic Games, the Athenian hoplites excelled at athletics at the Olympic Games. The Athenian army consisted only in the middle, the center of a Greek phalanx of heavily armored hoplites. The flanks consisted of light hoplites, but were double-manned.
Yes, your command! At speed!
Both armies formed opposite each other. As the Athenians began to move, General Miltiades marched ahead with his heavily armored hoplites in the thinly manned center of the Athenian line. When Miltiades came within range of the Persian archers, he sprinted towards the enemy ranks, which amazed the Persians as it bordered on suicide. The Persian general Datis rained down the immortal arrows, which the Athenian hoplites could barely withstand. The center of the Greek phalanx could not withstand the hail of arrows from the Persians and had to give way. So it appeared that the Athenian flanks could not keep up, and the Athenian center suddenly began to flee, which was readily accepted by the Persian troops, and they sprinted after them. But due to the sudden retreat of the center to the rear, the Athenian flanks were able to position themselves in a wedge formation towards the front and put the Persians in a pincer. For the Persian general Datis, only the success of the punitive expedition was important. So he had the Athenian left flank put under barrage fire by the Immortals. The result of this was that the Persian guards on this flank, who had already been heavily captured by the Athenian hoplites, were now decimated by a hail of arrows from behind, which made their morale and their early return to Persia as free men unlikely. And they fled. Shortly afterwards, Athenian hoplites also broke through on the right flank and were able to fight their way to the Persian Immortals, which were now attacked by both Athenian wings. This meant that the Persian troops were now trapped in the middle. Persian general Datis recognized the battle early on and joined the fleeing Persians. The escape to the Persian ships was particularly costly. Only a few ships escaped. The Persians lost about half of the punitive expedition. The Athenians only 200 hoplites. The Athenian troops won gloriously. And so began the golden age of Athens. The situation of homosexuality is relatively clear in the sources of classical Athens. The erotic sexual love of an older man for a boy who was going through puberty was considered socially legitimate during the Archaic and early classical eras of Athens and became so partially funded. Boy love was a form of education desired and even required by the state of Sparta, which was even enshrined in the law. If a man fell in love with a boy, he would tell the chosen one's family that he would be kidnapped 3 or 4 days in advance. If the family did not agree with the man and considered him dishonorable, they would thwart the robbery at the announced location. Hiding the boy himself would have meant that the family didn't consider him worthy enough to have an heiress. However, if the family had no objections to the man, they only pretended to follow the couple to the man's house, where the two lived for 2 months, after which the boy returned to his family with a rich gift. The relationship continued beyond that point until the boy reached the age of 18 and then transitioned into a lifelong friendship. According to Athenian law, it was not legal for an Athenian citizen to engage in prostitution. Working as a male prostitute could even lead to the loss of civil rights and influence for an Athenian. In Thebes around 378 BC, the Holy Band was founded, an elite military force that consisted exclusively of male lovers. This army lasted until 338 BC. When it was destroyed down to 46 men in the Battle of Chaeronea by the troops of Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander. These couples also consisted of an older and a younger partner.